What is maturity? Let's contemplate that, shall we? Let's contemplate it together. Have you noticed that some people are mature and others, in fact most, are immature? Surely you've noticed this in your short period on this planet. Have you ever wondered what makes that difference? And why would anyone want to be mature? And what is the process for how to become mature? What does that even mean? What does that look like? I'm going to give you an extensive list here of what constitutes maturity and immaturity. But I also want to help you, not just to give you the answers, but to help you to contemplate this stuff for yourself, because it's not obvious what maturity is. It's difficult to define. I had to spend many hours contemplating it, explicating it to myself so that I could share it here with you. But let's start off our inquiry here by acknowledging that you don't know what maturity is. I mean, you know what that word means. You can look it up in the dictionary, but what does it really look like to be a mature human being? What is that process? What kind of behaviors constitute that? That's not obvious. A lot of immature people don't know. So how do you solve this problem if you don't know? Where do you go to get the answers? Where am I getting the answers? Well, I'm contemplating. This is a process I've explained in the past. Go watch my videos that explain how to contemplate, how to contemplate using a journal and so forth, how to ask powerful questions. So what you do is you start just wondering and contemplating from scratch. It's always good just to begin from scratch, because answers coming from other people can distort your thinking, and already they will skew and bias your mind into thinking along some sort of predefined direction towards some kind of ideology, dogma, groupthink, that sort of thing. It's always good to just think independently from scratch about these things. Then you have a chance to generate some original answers. And then you can later compare notes with what other people have said online. So here's a question. What are some of the clearest examples of maturity that you can think of? Surely you've run across people who are mature in your life, and you've run across many who are immature. But then if you look at their behaviors, what is it actually that made you say, oh, that's a very immature person, or that's a very mature person, or that's a book written by a very mature person that contains a lot of very mature wisdom about life? Or you see some celebrity on TV behaving immaturely. What does that look like? What are they doing? So the most powerful way that I know how to contemplate, and I'm teaching you here how to contemplate. This is a contemplation exercise. I want you to actually try some of this stuff. But the way that I start to contemplate a topic completely from scratch is I ask myself, okay, what are some examples of the thing that I'm working on? Because if I'm working on some abstraction like maturity, that's a very abstract concept, maturity. What the hell does that even mean? So you have to make it concrete with examples. So I pull up in my mind at least one example of the most immature person I know and the most mature person I know, and then I just ask myself questions like, well, what's the difference between them? Who do you know or have met who is obviously immature? In what ways do they behave that make you think so? This is stuff I want you to actually contemplate. Pause and contemplate this. Write down some answers. Now, maturity is not a matter of age. Many adults and old people can be immature. Although it's interesting because generally speaking, the more people age, the more mature they become. So there is some correlation between age and maturity, but it's by no means a perfect correlation. Because of course, one of the things we say is that we commonly say that children are immature. That's the difference supposedly between a child and an adult. The child's immature, an adult is mature. So that's another way to, another angle from which to kind of look at this issue is, what's the difference between adult and children? Adults and children. Fundamentally, what's the difference there? What are they doing differently? How is the child behaving immaturely, and how is the adult behaving maturely? Now, of course, a lot of adults these days are children. So you have to be careful with that. You can't just assume that every adult is mature. Some children are more mature than some adults. But generally speaking, this is the case. And then that makes you wonder, well, but why? Why does age make one more mature? What does age have to do with it? Even though it's not a perfect correlation. And what does it look like, and what does it mean to mature with age? What is doing the maturing there? And why are children generally immature? Why aren't children born mature? These are like very fundamental questions. Maturity is not a binary, so it's not an on-off switch. It's a spectrum, of course. You can have more and more and more levels of maturity. And you can have a mixed bag. You can have a person who's mature in many ways, but then immature in certain other areas of life. A lot of times people have imbalanced, lopsided development. For example, someone could be mature in many different ways, but then immature sexually, immature in their relationships, immature in their spiritual development or in their understanding of spirituality, metaphysics, epistemology, or immature morally. So just because someone is generally mature doesn't mean they have all their bases covered. In fact, most likely you're going to have at least one or two areas where you're really struggling and you're strongly deficient. Then also you have to wonder, what are the costs of being mature or becoming mature? Is maturity something that you're just born with? There are some people who are genetically more mature than other people. Or is maturity something you have to develop over time? And if you're going to develop it over time, first of all, why would you want to? And second of all, what's the cost? Because supposedly if it was just all upside and no downside, wouldn't everybody be developing maturity? Then everybody would be mature. And if you look around in our society and our culture, actually, most people are very immature. How come? But then you also have to wonder, so then if there are costs to being mature, does that mean I should just stay immature? But then what are the costs of staying immature? And which costs are greater? So these are all questions to get your mind jogging and thinking, and I really want you to contemplate this on your own. But, since I want to provide you with some value here in this episode, let me give you some extensive lists of my own conclusions from my own contemplations on these questions. So list number one is, what is maturity? First and foremost at the top of my list is taking on responsibility versus blaming others. This is like the quick litmus test for gauging someone's maturity. An immature person is going to blame somebody else. They're not going to take ownership over situations. They need other people to goad them into doing things and taking ownership. Whereas a mature person takes on the responsibility willingly, consciously. Doesn't wait around for others to do it for them. Doesn't need some sort of extrinsic prodding, either by humans or by nature. Very irresponsible people, immature people, what they do is they wait for reality to get so dire and bad that then they're just forced to do a thing. Whereas the hallmark of maturity is that you can motivate yourself to do something you know you should be doing, the right thing, so to speak, without having to be in pain and suffering from external circumstances. Like, for example, going broke and running completely out of money. That would be an immature person's response to the financial situation, right? It's like, I'm just going to spend all my money and then I'm only going to worry about running out of money once I'm out of money. But then the problem is it's too late. It's very difficult to then do anything about that situation, right? A mature person will worry about their money situation long before they ever run out of money, and therefore they never will. And they take responsibility for that. Maturity is knowing that you can act like a child, but consciously choosing not to. It's doing the right thing at the right time rather than putting it off. which requires discipline. Immature people are not able to discipline themselves. And they put stuff off, and they put stuff off, and they put stuff off, and they don't do the right thing at the right time. And most of the time, most of us know the right thing to do and the right time to do it. But we're just so irresponsible and immature that we find ways to avoid it. So maturity is letting go of that sort of avoidance mechanism that is there in the ego mind. It's taking on emotionally difficult things in life, doing things that are challenging, and life will present you with many challenges. To live the good life, you have to take on these emotionally difficult tasks. Or what you can do is you can play avoidance games, which is what the immature person does. So maturity is saying no to those kind of avoidance games. Maturity also means work ethic, not expecting shortcuts, being willing to work towards certain higher values that you have. So one of the hallmarks of an immature person is that they're lazy and they don't want to work towards the things that are good for them or that they want. You might want something, but then when you find out the work that it takes to get it, you're like, I would rather just sit it on the couch and play video games and smoke weed and jerk off. The mature person understands that working for the things that you really value, this builds character in you. This is not something that should be avoided. It is not the ideal situation where you get everything you want in life the easy way through shortcuts and it all works out and there's no challenge. The mature person doesn't even want that kind of life, you see. The immature person thinks that that's the ideal life. And then the immature person whines and complains about how, why does life have to be so difficult? Whereas the mature person understands that what makes life meaningful at all is that you have to work for these things that you truly value, that they're not easy. And if they were easy and you can get them just by snapping your fingers and people just gave them to you, then they wouldn't be worth anything. And then you wouldn't really want them. The reason you want them is because they're rare. And the reason they're rare is because you got to work for it. So I like to judge people's character by looking at what is their work ethic. Are they the kind of people that like to avoid work at all costs and do the bare minimum amount of work? This tells you almost everything you need to know about a person's character right there. That's not a serious human being. There is no good lifestyle. I don't mean lifestyle. I mean living the good life. This is something a little bit more deeper than just lifestyle. But this concept I've talked about before, living the good life, there is no living the good life and having it easy. Nobody who lives the good life has it easy. Because you can't live the good life just by getting lucky and getting a bunch of money. That's not going to produce the good life for you. And a mature person understands this. And that these challenges that life confronts you with, that this is actually a character building exercise and opportunity. And that's really the point of life. So what's the point in trying to run away from it or avoid it? To be mature is to face the challenges of life gracefully. Sometimes life gets extremely challenging. That's when you're really tested. And that's when the immature person will crumble and the mature person will demonstrate his or her true character. Facing that challenge rather than running away from it. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that you're going to succeed or do it perfectly, but at least the willingness to take on that challenge and to give it your best. Maturity is also a sense of duty. Duty to others, to your community, to mankind, and even beyond that, to the entire universe. Your life is about something more than just selfishly trying to entertain yourself or amuse yourself. Maturity is the ability to sacrifice for higher values, which of course requires having a good discernment of what are the higher values. And that's not always easy because a lot of times people get confused and they think of higher value things as money or sex or something like that, success, fame, that those become traps. So the ability to discern what is a higher value, what's not a higher value, those can be counterintuitive. And it's also the ability to commit. Because to live a life to the higher values that you have, you're going to have to make certain commitments and stick with those over long periods of time. This is not something you can achieve with short-term thinking. As I was contemplating this question of what is maturity, this following anecdote came to mind. And I was just thinking recently about how having a child is one of the greatest responsibilities you can take on in life, having a child. It'll change your whole life. Even though I don't have children, it's obvious to me that this is how it works. If you just think about it for a little bit, you don't really appreciate the responsibility your parents took on until you're much older. The kind of responsibility they had raising you, especially if you had decent parents who weren't completely immature and they were there for you. They weren't negligent parents. They didn't run away or anything like that. If they were there for you and they worked for you and they raised you reasonably well, you have to get like into your late 30s and 40s. I'm getting there, to start to appreciate just the enormity of the task that your parents had to raise you well and how much they sacrificed and what kind of enormous responsibility it took from them and the kind of enormous maturity it took from them, even if they weren't perfectly mature and they did immature stuff, of course. That's a given, but nevertheless, compared to who they used to be before they had you, you don't even know what your parents were like before they had you, how irresponsible and immature they were. Your birth made them a lot more mature. It's going to take you a while to realize that. At least, in most cases, of course, there's examples of very bad parenting and very immature parenting. So maybe you got unlucky. But I submit to you the following. Consider that the day that your child is born, if you ever have a child, you will realize, and in that day, your whole life will change because you will realize, holy shit, my life is no longer primarily about serving myself. Now I have to be a responsible adult for the sake of someone else. And then later, when your child is crying, when your child is 10 years old or something and your child is crying, but you're very tired, you had a long day at work, and you just come home after 10 hours of working, and now you turn on the TV, you just want to relax for a little bit before you go to bed. You're dead tired. And then your child is there crying in the other room. You have two options there. You can keep watching your TV and just tune the child out, or you can get up and attend to your child. That would be the mature option. See? And that's sacrifice. You're sacrificing for something higher, something beyond you. You're living for something beyond you. So consider how you would handle that kind of situation. Imagine you had a child tomorrow. Would you be mature enough to handle taking care of that child? Because see, taking care of that child means you have to set all your personal issues aside. Your personal sexual cravings, your desire to have fun, your desire to do drugs and smoke weed and do psychedelics, your desire to slack off and to go partying, clubbing, all this kind of stuff. This would all have to take a back seat to the needs of your child. If your child is sick, you got to get up in the middle of the night, take them to a hospital. If your child's getting bad grades at school, you got to deal with that. And it's just a never-ending stream of this for 20 years. And you never know how your child's going to turn out. Your child maybe you do all that perfectly and your child is a sort of a straight A student and all that kind of stuff, and you're proud of your child. But you know what? There's no guarantee. You could be the best parent and your child just gets involved with the wrong crowd, starts doing drugs, starts doing vandalism, joins a gang, starts robbing people, starts doing violence, maybe even murders someone. That could happen too. And that's largely out of your control. That's some serious maturity right there. That takes a lot of maturity to deal with that kind of stuff. Just even, for example, let's say your child is born with a birth defect. Just even dealing with that health, serious health complications, imagine you're born with a crippled, your child is born crippled or something like that, and then you have to deal with that for the rest of your life. Imagine what kind of burden that puts on you. That takes enormous maturity to stick with that, to not run away from that kind of situation, to embrace it, to accept it, to still love your child despite all that. So, good parenting, being a good parent is also another one of those litmus tests. That's like such an honest signal kind of litmus test. You can't fake being a good parent. That takes enormous maturity. You can't be a good parent and be immature. Another important aspect of maturity is self-control. Immaturity is being constantly lost in your own emotions, unable to act consistently, gently, peacefully, deliberately. You're too chaotic, you're all over the place, your mind is all over the place. You're lost in drama. So knowing how to handle your emotions, emotional maturity is a hallmark of, emotional mastery is a hallmark of maturity. Not getting triggered so easily by things people say or do. This is a notion known as non-reactivity. Immature people are very reactive. They get easily offended, easily triggered, because they're not in control of their emotions. Steadiness and consistency versus drama and chaos. This is the difference. Also, patience. Immature people are impatient, always. And mature people have cultivated patience. Another key sign that I've identified of maturity is the following. I love this one. Listen to this. Refusing to engage in emotional manipulation techniques. This is huge. What do I mean by emotional manipulation techniques? Things like blaming, scapegoating, gaslighting, denial, getting triggered, getting offended, losing your temper, projection, and rationalization. Immature people engage in all of this stuff all the time, and they don't know how to stop. They don't even understand that they're doing it, and they have no shame in doing these things. That's how unconscious they are. It is the hallmark of a mature mind to relinquish all of these. You say no to emotional manipulation techniques. You have higher standards for yourself, and you don't allow yourself to use these to navigate life. Now, that means you have to forfeit and surrender certain benefits that come with using these emotional manipulation techniques. The mature person doesn't demonize, strawman, and misrepresent. The mature person is non-judgmental and non-exploitative. See, the immature person will exploit any opportunity because it's a survival mechanism. We've talked about survival. Go see my 2-part series called Understanding Survival, Part 1, Part 2, where we go deep on survival. But we're bringing that topic in here and connecting it with this, is that when you're just running on survival all the time, then the easiest way to do that is just to be very opportunistic. And if you see an opportunity to exploit someone, especially another human, you do it. The mature person says no to that. Even when opportunity presents itself to exploit someone, you aren't even tempted by it. And a mature person undertakes a commitment to not manipulate people. Whereas immature people are always manipulating other people to get their needs met. Whereas the mature person finds higher quality ways of getting his needs met than through this kind of manipulation and emotional manipulation that we talked about earlier. Now, this usually means that this kind of mature person has to work harder. Because you can't just manipulate and exploit somebody real quickly, to steal some money or scam them or whatever, or to get some sex out of them. You have to actually put in effort. See, an immature person could just manipulate somebody to get some quick sex. But a mature person has higher standards. They don't allow themselves to do that. That means they sacrifice the quantity of sex because they have to actually work towards building a high quality relationship before they will get the sex. And it's not done through some kind of easy manipulation. Likewise, in business, the difference between an immature business person and a mature business person is that the immature business person will just find the fastest opportunity to scam somebody out of some money. Whereas the mature person isn't interested in doing business that way. It's not that he can't. He can. It's just that he has a higher standard and he doesn't want to do business that way. So now it's harder to come up with a genuine business where I'm not exploiting people, because that means I have to generate real value. Generating real value takes a lot of hard work, whereas just scamming people is a lot easier. See? This pretty much explains the whole crypto industry right here. Crypto is immature people looking for quick profit. They're not interested in working. This idea of not wanting to do genuine work. This is a huge point, right? Try to understand this. It's not just about I don't want to have a job or, I want to optimize my work. It's there's a whole attitude that people have of living in a way where they try to avoid doing work, and not just work, but really it's emotional labor that you're avoiding. That's a more general thing. I've talked about that in actually my life purpose course. In my life purpose course, we focus on this issue of avoiding emotional labor and how this is really tripping you up in life. You can't live a good life without taking on emotional labor. And that doesn't just apply to work per se. It also comes up in relationships and it comes up in this next point, which is, this is also, it's hard to say which one of these points is the topmost point. Definitely that responsibility point is up there as number one, maybe. And here's probably the next one is facing truth. The mature person faces truth. And the mature person sees the importance of facing truth all throughout life. Whereas the immature person is avoiding difficult truths because they're inconvenient or they impinge on one's fantasies. See, the problem with truth is that it impinges on your fantasies. It destroys all your fantasies about yourself, about the world, about others, about religion, about politics, everything. See my episode called Why You Avoid the Truth. So that ties in here. But I want you to contemplate this. This is so central and fundamental to maturity, is, facing truth. And, most people don't give a shit about truth. Which immediately tells you why most people are immature. They don't care about truth. They don't take truth seriously. They think they can just kind of skate their way through life without taking truth seriously. How people can delude themselves into this kind of mindset, I don't even understand. To me, truth was important since I was a child. But then again, I was a pretty mature kid. But I want you to contemplate this question. Why is it immature to avoid truth? What is the relationship between truth, facing truth, and maturity? Why are those connected? It's not some arbitrary thing. There's a deep relationship there. What is that relationship? Contemplate that. To be mature is to be deeply rooted in the reality of things, rather than lost in wishful thinking and fantasy. You see, the human mind is so prone to spinning its own versions of reality and avoiding truth and fantasizing and justifying itself and then getting lost in various kinds of ideological bubbles and different worldviews and cults and religions and this ideology and that philosophy, right? This is what the human mind is always doing. This is what much of my work, my epistemic work is about, is helping you to avoid these kind of self-deceptions of the mind, especially when it comes to epistemology. But you see, the more immature a person is, the worse their worldview is. Their worldview is not truthful. It's not accurate. They're living in a fantasy of some kind. And then the reason they're acting out so immaturely is because they need to somehow maintain that fantasy. And usually that's done through lying, cheating, stealing, defrauding, scamming, exploiting, manipulating, acting out, emotional outbursts, drama, all this shit. And the more untruthful you are, the more these sorts of emotional manipulation mechanisms you need to survive through life. Maturity is about deep understanding of situations. Because the deeper you can penetrate a situation with your understanding, that cuts through illusion, you see? Cuts through illusion. So there's a relationship between illusion and immaturity. Immature people are under a lot of illusions because they don't value truth and because they avoid truth and they think they can get away with that. One of the hallmarks of immaturity is thinking you can get away with untruth, with falsehood. The mature person understands that truth is such a serious issue that you're really a fool if you think you can just skate by through life, bobbing and weaving your way, deftly avoiding the truth and thinking that you're just going to get by. 80 years you can do this and get by without consequence. This is, to the mature mind, this is preposterous. This is a preposterous way to live. The immature mind actually believes this is a good way to live and that actually it's winning at this because you can do it for a short period of time. For a short period of time, maybe even for years or for a decade, you can do this. And then the immature mind gets convinced or it fools itself and falls into this illusion that it has spun for itself that actually this is going to work. You know, it's like, I've cheated a few people and I've made some money and I'm going to keep doing it and it's going to keep working. This is how the immature mind thinks. Or it's like, you know, I've manipulated a few of these women to sleep with me by lying to them and cheating on them and all that. And it's just going to continue. I'm just going to continue this and it's going to keep working. The next point on maturity is epistemic humility. Epistemic humility and not knowing, understanding the power and importance of not knowing. Go see my episode, The Power of Not Knowing. You know a lot less than you think you know. The mature person understands that. The immature person does not. The immature person does not have epistemic humility. So I've talked about that a lot in my past episodes on epistemology. Go check those out. Maturity is being honest versus lying and cheating. Maturity is to be able to see outside your own perspective and agenda, to see from others' perspectives. An immature person is too selfish to see outside his own perspective and is lost in self-bias. Go see my episode titled Self-Bias and another one called Understanding Bias. Very important episodes. Also, that relates to truth. You know, this issue of bias, why is this so important? Why do I talk about it a lot? Because again, it relates to truth. Because the less truthful you are, the more illusions you're under, the more biased you are. Bias is illusion in a sense. And your own perspective and agenda, your own survival agenda, that is your primary source of bias. Another point on maturity is to be respectful of the sovereignty of others. To understand the importance that I've talked about that elsewhere, the sovereignty of others. What does that even mean? I've explained it elsewhere. But basically it means understanding that every human is a sovereign individual, sovereign consciousness, and needs to be treated as such. As soon as you stop treating people in that way by manipulating them and trying to control them and push them around and so forth, dominate them, all hell breaks loose. So, respecting others' sovereignty means not trying to control others, not trying to impose your agenda on them and your perspective, and not trying to get everyone else to live the way that you live. Understanding that you don't need to impose yourself on everybody else, appreciating that people have unique needs, values, strengths, weaknesses, personality types, and everyone has to live their own unique lifestyle. So what's an example of an application of this? Like this, look, if you're an immature parent, you're going to try to get your child to obey basically your agenda. You're going to overlook the sovereignty of your child as an individual consciousness, and you're just going to say, your child might come to you and you might ask your child, like, so what do you want to be when you grow up? And the child says, I want to be an artist. And you say an artist? No, that's nonsense. You're going to be a doctor, a lawyer, or an accountant. A real professional or an engineer, like this. And your child will say, no, but I really have some artistic abilities, and I don't like accounting and engineering. I'm not good at that. You'll say, no, to hell with that. You're just going to become an accountant. See, this would be an example of immature parenting, whereas mature parenting would be actually listening to your child, evaluating your child's unique needs, strengths, weaknesses, passions, and predilections and personality type, and understanding that if your child is not passionate about accounting, he's never going to become a good accountant. And in fact, he'll probably quit and he'll blame you for it. Whereas, if he's got some passion for art, it's your job. You see, the challenge of being a mature adult parent is that, like, you have to set aside your own agenda and what you want for your child, because your child might want things that are antithetical to your personality type. You might think that the things your child is interested in are stupid. And you have to set that aside and say, you know what, for the good of my child, it doesn't really matter what my personal judgment is about what he's doing is stupid or not. It's like there's a higher aspect to all this. But see, that's how a mature parent would behave. Usually, as a parent, the trap is that you're going to want to impose all of your values on the child. Your values, your personality type, your lifestyle, and then that's going to create a lot of conflict because, of course, your child has different strengths, weaknesses, personality, values, and lifestyle, and that is ideal for them than for you. You can't just assume that your ideal lifestyle is their ideal lifestyle. That's real difficult to do because you got to step outside of your agenda. A lot of people are so selfish that they literally cannot do that. And then that creates a lot of family conflict, relationship conflict, of course. Maturity is also the ability to compromise. The ability to be flexible and to change your mind. See, immature people think that compromise is a bad thing, a dirty word, especially in politics. You'll notice this, that the most mature politicians understand the importance of compromise in a democracy. The most immature politicians and political actors and activists, they view compromise as some kind of evil. They want to get everything their way, and they want to defeat the other side. They actually believe they can do that. Some conservatives actually believe that they're going to, destroy liberalism. And some progressives and leftists believe that they're going to destroy and put an end to conservatism. See some of my videos about conscious politics where I discuss about there's a deep immaturity in our political climate right now, which is playing itself out. Very, very immature. Incredible. In fact, I'm shocked at how immature it is. It's cartoonishly immature. I'll be talking a little bit more about politics here in a moment, because there's some great examples that I just can't resist. You probably know which ones, but okay, we'll get there in a minute. So the ability to compromise, like you'll see that the most senior senators and politicians in Congress, they're pretty good at compromising. Whereas the new ones, there's like a lot of sort of like radical, especially on the right wing in American politics, there's a lot of radical new senators and Congress people who came into power in the last 5 years, let's say, in this MAGA era. And you look at these people and they're very passionate, they're unwilling to compromise, and they think that by doing this that they're somehow being like champions for conservative values or whatever they believe they're defending, God or country or whatever. But you can tell that these are the most immature, the most green, the most ignorant. These people know nothing about government. They know nothing about serious politics. They have no understanding of how societies develop. They have no understanding of history. They're just utterly ignorant. And they're the most unyielding and inflexible. Coincidence? I think not. Another sign of maturity is taking care of your health. Valuing your health requires a lot of maturity. Not just valuing it, but acting out on that value. Because what does it mean to value your health? Well, that means you have to make sacrifices in terms of the junk food that you will no longer eat. You have to make sacrifices going to the gym. You have to make sacrifices going to the doctor when maybe you would prefer not to. Getting certain procedures done when you would rather put them off. See, health is one of those things that you take for granted when you're young. If you're in your teens, 20s, 30s, for most people, their health is pretty good. They can eat junk. They can not exercise. They can engage in, drugs and this kind of stuff recreationally, and it feels like they can get away with it. Well, they're being immature. They're not thinking long term. They're acting impulsively. So, the more someone takes care of their health, the more mature they are, because that's not easy to do, especially in our modern culture and society where on every street corner you have junk food. And it can be difficult sometimes to get high quality whole foods, organic foods, vegetables and fruits and so forth, raw foods. And it's more expensive too. You have to work harder, right? Some people say, well, Leo, but I can't afford healthy food. Right, because see, it's not really that you can't afford it. It's that you don't understand yet that you have to value it so much that you're going to work harder to be able to afford it. It's a sacrifice. Maybe in order to afford it, you have to start a business, which means you have to work a lot harder than you would work otherwise. But then, once you get that business going after a few years, now you can afford all the health food you want and not worry about it. Whereas the immature person will just say, well, I can't afford it, and I'm not going to take responsibility for starting a business because that's too hard, and I'm kind of lazy, and I want to avoid work, and so therefore I'm just going to keep eating junk food, and I'm going to keep complaining and making this excuse that, well, I would eat healthy if I could afford it, but I can't. And then for the rest of their life, they're going to live that way. See, that's very irresponsible, immature behavior. You're not taking ownership over the situation. If you can't afford something in life, that means take ownership of it and figure out a way to work harder and make more money. By starting a business or getting a promotion, learning some new skills that will make you, allow you to get hired for a higher wage, or just work more hours. Maturity is also experience and familiarity with all of the common traps, so they no longer seduce you. Immature people are easily seduced by traps like fame, sex, cheating, lying, scamming, exploiting, manipulating. These are all traps. To the mature person, it's obvious that these kind of things are traps and that therefore you should say no to them. But to the immature person, it's not obvious that heroin is a trap. Believe it or not. I mean, like, to a mature person, it's so obvious that heroin is a trap that there's not even the desire to try heroin. But to the immature person, they can't see that heroin is a trap. Or that crypto is a trap. Full disclosure, I do own some crypto, but the majority of crypto, let's just be honest, it's a scam, it's a trap. And the reason people get trapped by it is because they lack experience. It takes a lot of life experience to be able to see the counterintuitive nature of all these traps. Go see my episode, The Counterintuitive Nature of Life, where we talk about that pattern, that dynamic that traps a lot of people. Life is very counterintuitive. You need a lot of experience falling into these traps to know how to avoid them. And also, I have another episode called Exposing Yourself to Massive Experience. I believe that's what it's called, something like that. Massive experience, search for that term. You'll find it. And this actually answers that earlier question we asked, which is, what does age have to do with maturity? Well, this is, I think, the core of the answer is that when you're born young, you're born so ignorant, so inexperienced that you don't know that walking off a cliff is going to kill you. You don't know that yet. And but for your fear of heights, you would jump off a cliff. That's how stupid a child is. So just a lack of experience. Right? A child doesn't even know that sticking his hand on a stove is going to hurt. That takes experience to know that. And then just, there's a lot of examples that these are just very obvious examples, but there's a lot of much more subtle examples. A child doesn't know that crypto is a scam, whereas an adult should know that, for example. But there's a lot of adults who are children and who don't know that. Or at least what we could say is that, more accurately, is that they're financially immature. There's a lot of financially immature people. Most are that way. That's why most people are broke. A lot of it is financial immaturity. Capitalism has some issues to do with it as well. But a lot of people, if you gave them $1 million, they would lose it within a couple of years because they're so financially immature. They would invest it in crypto and other stupid shit and lose it. So, generally speaking, the more you age, the more experience, the more life experience, of course, you have, the more traps you've fallen into, the more mistakes you've made, and you learn not to make those mistakes again. So that's why the older you get, the more mature you tend to get, although it's not guaranteed. Maturity is the ability to anticipate problems and address them preemptively before things get out of hand. Maturity is the ability to make long-term decisions based on solid principles. Immature people don't have any principles, or even if they do have some principles, it's just purely theoretical. They can't actualize or embody their principles or act out their principles because that requires consistent action taking, which they cannot do because they're so emotionally out of control that they can't even show up to work on time for a month straight. So what principled life can they live? Even if they wanted to, they couldn't be honest for a month straight. Because they would tell themselves one day, okay, I'm going to be honest, and then the next day they would break their own word. It's not just that they betray others. They, first and foremost, they betray themselves. They can't control themselves. They're out of control. Maturity is long-term thinking versus short-term thinking. The reason the immature person engages in short-term thinking is because what's the point of them even doing long-term thinking? Because to do long-term thinking means you have to then act in alignment with long-term thinking. But if you're so emotionally lost and out of control that you can't even act consistently for 1 month, and do one thing consistently for 1 month that you have set your mind to, like let's say you set your mind to go to the gym for a month straight. An immature person cannot do that. Therefore, for them, long-term thinking doesn't make sense. Because what's the point of it? They can't act on it because they're run by their emotions and their impulses, like an animal. Maturity, very importantly, is taking ownership of your mistakes, the ability to apologize, to admit mistakes, and to take criticism. And when somebody else points the truth out to you, see, the key difference is that the immature person gets annoyed, upset, offended, and threatened, and takes it out on the messenger, shoots the messenger, whereas the mature person is thankful that somebody pointed out some sort of difficult truth to them, even though it's not pleasant to hear somebody criticizing you, for example, but there could be truth in that criticism, and the mature person understands that it's more important to face that truth and to incur the temporary emotional, labor and pain of that, suffer a little bit, but in the long term, you win out. Whereas the immature person can't handle that, can't handle the truth. That's why they can't handle criticism very well. And they will shoot the messenger that brings truth to them, which means people will stop at some point bringing truth to them. And then that's perfect for these immature people because that just allows them to get lost in their own bubble of illusion. Because when people bring truth to you, that's them trying to help to bust you out of your egotistical solipsism, we might say. We might say that everybody is lost in a bubble of ego solipsism. And one of the most important functions that other human beings serve is that they can help you to offer perspectives and feedback to help you to bust you out of your ego solipsism. But if you shoot everybody who tries to come help you, at some point, people will know not to come help you anymore. And then that allows you to just get very comfortable in your egoic solipsism, but there's a cost that comes with that. Maturity is to act in alignment with a clear sense of values. Maturity is integrity, being principled. See my episode, What is Integrity? Maturity is being self-directed, the ability to lead yourself rather than conforming and just following the mob and doing what everybody else is doing as part of some herd. Maturity is being non-ideological, non-biased, non-conformist, thinking things through from first principles for yourself. Maturity is having your ducks in a row, taking care of yourself. See, fundamentally, the immature person is incapable of taking care of himself, and then he or she becomes a burden onto others because they need others to take care of them. So the immature person needs the mature person to take care of them, especially when all of their illusions fail to work out. Then the immature person comes crying for help to the mature person, looking for a bailout. And then the mature person, having compassion and so forth, oftentimes can fall into the trap of that sort of idiot compassion and bailing them out. When really, a lot of times what needs to happen is that the immature person needs to learn from the suffering of their lies, deceit, manipulations, and truth avoidance. They need to feel the suffering of that and then learn those lessons. But of course, they don't want to learn those lessons, so they're always looking for some kind of bailout. And in this way, the immature person could abuse and exploit the mature person if the mature person isn't careful. Maturity is understanding that your words and actions serve as a role model to others. So how you behave influences how others behave. When you behave in an immature way, that leads to a climate of immaturity. And then that drags down the average, the center of gravity of the organization, the family, the corporation, the country, the whole world, humanity. The mature person takes on the responsibility of being a good role model to others. It's part of what being a parent means, being a good role model to your children. But being a good role model is much more goes way beyond just being a good parent. Maturity is the ability to communicate consciously, to resolve disputes and disagreements without using force. Immature people are always in conflict. The more immature someone is, the more violent they are. Again, they're out of control, and they don't know how to handle or resolve differences in perspective through conscious communication. I'm going to have an episode about that in the future called Conscious Communication, so search for that if you're watching this sometimes after I release. And of course, an important corollary to this point is the ability to listen. Maturity is the ability to really listen. Most people don't know how to really listen. Therefore, they don't know how to communicate consciously either. To be able to really listen to someone, you have to step outside of yourself, your agenda, your perspective. You can't be as selfish and egotistical as you are and be a good listener. And this is a very deep point. Maturity is the ability to let go and to surrender. The ability to accept things as they are. See my episode called The Power of Letting Go. The immature person is unable to surrender or let go of things to the point of being driven, OCD, driving themselves crazy in their mind. They're not even able to let go of a certain thought, a certain destructive thought. Immature person can't do that. And lastly, maturity is wisdom, of course. Go see my episode, What is Wisdom?, where we discuss that in great detail. Maturity is, at the highest level, consciousness and intelligence, of course. And of course, ultimately, maturity just boils down to being selfless. Of course. There's nothing more to maturity but ever higher levels of selflessness. That's all it is. Of course. Why would it be anything else? And now let's cover immaturity. Now, I've already been covering, because immaturity is just the inverse of maturity, so we've already covered many of these points, but, just a little bit of a different angle here. What is immaturity? It's, first and foremost, shirking responsibility, avoiding responsibility through evasion, manipulation, and trickery. Immaturity is, in a nutshell, all the ways that Donald Trump acts. What is Donald Trump's chief problem? He's immature. He's a child. He's a man-child. And what makes Trump so immature? He does things for such vain reasons. Just look at the reasons and the motivations behind his actions. I mean, it's preposterous how childish he is. And the fact that this is not clearly spelled out and obvious in the media and to half the American population is it's preposterous. It's absurd. It's a fucking farce is what it is. One of the things that annoys me the most about commentary about Trump is that, especially like people in mainstream media, like on CNN and MSNBC, they will speak about Trump and his actions as though he's a mature person. And then, they will treat him as though he's mature, and they will just kind of like try to have a conversation with him, or just try to treat him like every other adult politician, which to me is completely preposterous, because you're ignoring the elephant in the room, right? Like for example, if Trump says something, they will give him the benefit of the doubt that what he's saying is true. But this is not how you deal with a character like Trump. A character like Trump, the way you deal with him is you completely call him out on his immature, childish horseshit immediately. You don't allow any leeway in terms of he's a child. This is how you speak to him. You speak to him like a child. You treat him like a child. That's what he is. And anybody who supports him, seriously, is a child. You called him out for being a fucking immature child. That's what they are. That's what every Trump supporter is. They're children. Trump is completely out of control. You see, that's his whole problem. He doesn't know how to control himself. He cannot even control himself to not eat a cheeseburger. That's his situation. That's how big of a child he is. This is not partisan. This is not political. It has nothing to do with politics. His policies and his politics are irrelevant. It's all about the fact that he's a child. He lacks total self-restraint. He's completely spoiled and entitled. This man is not equipped to lead anybody. He cannot even lead himself. He's an utter narcissist and egotist. And this is the only conversation that mainstream media should be having about Trump. The only one. Not about his policy or about the wall or about this thing that he did or that thing he wants to do or his political ambitions. It's like, no, let's talk about the fact that you're a fucking child, and that's where it ends. Until you stop being a child, we're not going to move on to talk about anything else. You might say, Leo, but you're so biased. No, it's not that I'm biased. It's that, yes, I'm biased. My whole bias is that my job is to teach people how to become mature and selfless. That's my job. So of course I'm biased in this regard. Compare Trump's level of maturity to Obama's level of maturity. Obama was a good example of mature. He was careful. He was deliberate. He was in control of himself. That's the difference. He wasn't spoiled. He wasn't entitled. All it is a difference in selfishness and selflessness. That's fundamentally what it is. See, what is Trump's number one quality is that, well, first of all, he has no respect for the truth whatsoever. And he takes responsibility for absolutely nothing. There you go. That's the hallmark of a child. He throws tantrums. He's unable to say no to himself. You can't have someone like that leading the country. If that's not obvious to you, there's nothing more to be said. Maturity is self-restraint, which is the one thing that Trump completely lacks. He has no sense of self-restraint. He wouldn't even appreciate why self-restraint would be something one would want to cultivate. Immaturity is impulsiveness, impatience, emotional outbursts, throwing tantrums, having an inconsistent, chaotic mind and behavior that, of course, comes from that mind, because chaotic behavior comes from chaotic mind, obviously. Immaturity is being needy, desperately clinging for approval, validation, attention, fame, glory, power, love, money, or sex. An immature ego chases after these things because it is deficient in them and doesn't yet see them as traps and doesn't know how to fulfill these needs of its. Some of these needs are legitimate. I'm not saying sex is wrong or anything. Money is not bad or anything, but it's how you go about it, how you relate to it that matters. And you can pursue these things in a way where it becomes a trap and in ways which are healthy. So the ego doesn't distinguish these things and falls into all these as traps. Immaturity is running around seeking pleasure and fun, to be driven by sex and other kind of cravings, to make your life about that. Immaturity is to fight, to argue, to blame, to name call. Rather than doing these things, the mature thing to do is to reflect on your own behaviors. Immaturity is getting stuck in conflict, the inability to avoid argument and conflict. An immature person simply doesn't know how to avoid argument and conflict because they're so stuck in their own illusions. They can't step outside themselves and their agenda. Immature people resolve things through brute force and domination, through authoritarianism, which of course is another feature of Trumpism. Authoritarianism. Why does Trump like authoritarian leaders around the world like Putin and Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping of China and so forth, and Bolsonaro of Brazil and so forth? Because an extremely selfish person doesn't know how to resolve conflict in any other way but through domination. So they see domination as the prime strategy. What I got to do is I just got to out-dominate others. I don't need to learn to listen to them. I don't need to learn to communicate. I don't need to learn how to restrain myself. I don't need to learn how to control my emotions or any of that. I just need to know how to dominate others more. That will solve my problem. See? Have you noticed that the less developed a country is, the less mature a society is, the more of an authoritarian government it has? And then these governments tend to be very cruel and violent. And they tend not to have free speech. They don't have good dialogue. There's not a lot of dialoguing going on in these kind of countries. But then what happens is that as the society evolves, eventually the society reaches a certain level where authoritarianism becomes impossible. Whereas before it was the only means, after a certain point it becomes impossible. Why is that? Well, because the center of gravity of that culture and society has shifted and developed to a more mature point where people are not going to tolerate, other mature people are not going to tolerate that kind of immature behavior. Which is what Donald Trump is finding out. The center of gravity of American culture is actually above where Donald Trump is. Which is why a lot of his antics and so forth don't work very well anymore. They worked in the short term before people really caught on to his level of immaturity. See, a lot of people were caught by surprise in 2016. They didn't really know Donald Trump very well, or they kind of assumed that he was just kind of like a normal guy and it wouldn't be that big of a deal. I mean, it was obvious it was going to be a big problem, and that it was obvious he was a child from the very beginning, if you have any sense of what maturity and immaturity are. But a lot of people are not very psychologically adept and aware, so they didn't know this stuff that I'm talking about here. So Trump was able to kind of like sneak his way in the door as it was closing. But now people are caught onto his tricks. Now it's very obvious how immature he is to most people. No, not to everybody, not to as many people as it should be obvious to. Maybe 30% of the population in America still doesn't understand because they themselves are immature. But, to appreciate maturity, you have to be mature. Look at the founding fathers of America. Why is America a great country? Look at the founding fathers. They were very mature politicians. They weren't your typical politicians. Very mature. Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, George Washington. Who am I forgetting? There were a few others in there, Madison, so forth, John Adams, etc. So very, very wise, very, very mature politicians that thought deeply, long-term, were not impulsive, were not power-hungry, were not tyrannical, were not authoritarian. Basically, the exact opposite of Trump. If the founding fathers of America had the maturity of Donald Trump, today we would be living in a dictatorship. If this is not obvious to you, I don't know what else I can say. Your politics are shit. Immaturity is pretentiousness and posturing, bragging, needing to take credit, acting entitled and spoiled, arrogance, fraud, criminality, exploitation, theft, and cheating. Consider the difference between mature masculinity versus immature masculinity. We have a bit of a masculinity crisis, I would say, right now in our online culture. A lot of young men are growing up and they don't know how to be masculine. They look for role models, and what they find online is a lot of very immature men teaching men how to become men. And it's this Andrew Tate shit. It's this pickup artist shit. Extremely immature. Comically immature. There's a lack of good role models of mature masculinity. I tried to address that point in my series, How to Get Laid, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, where I try to teach pickup in a more mature way. So compare that to some of the less mature ways in which pickup is taught most of the time by pickup coaches. Compare. Judge for yourself the difference. Immaturity is not considering the impact of your actions on others in the world. Willful ignorance of externalities. A lot of corporations are very immature. See? This doesn't just apply to people, it applies to organizations, collectives, nations, and of course, corporations. Business can be done in a mature way or an immature way. Most business these days is immature business. In 100 years from now, the way business is done is going to be so much more mature. These kind of gross externalities that are standard business practice on Wall Street these days, this is not going to persist 100 years from now. We're going to mature and grow out of it. But for now, a lot of companies, what they do is they just push the externalities of their business onto the public sector, or onto society at large, onto the commons, tragedy of the commons sort of situation. You know, some of these oil companies, gas companies, chemical pollution companies, and big pharma companies, and so forth with the externalities. And I want to underscore this key term, willful ignorance. This is a very good term when we're discussing immaturity. Immaturity, you could say in a nutshell, is willful ignorance. It's aggressive ignorance. And a lot of these Trump supporters are aggressively ignorant. They're not just ignorant, they're aggressively ignorant. They're willfully ignorant. They're proud of their ignorance. Immaturity is a lack of understanding of situations because you are too self-absorbed, biased, untruthful, avoidant, and reactive to understand them properly. To understand a situation accurately requires truthfulness, honesty, lack of bias, ability to see multiple perspectives, and to deal with difficult truths, and to be in control of your emotions. If you're lost in a haze of chaotic emotions, you can't understand anything. And then you pay for that. And then your lack of understanding doubles down on itself. The errors keep increasing. The reason you're in conflict with other people all the time is because you can't understand them. Because you're too self-absorbed to understand them. Immaturity is an inability to execute long-term plans, of course, because you're out of control. An out-of-control person cannot go to the gym consistently for a month. Impossible. Cannot do his homework consistently for a month. Impossible. Cannot show up to work on time for a month. Impossible. Which, of course, interferes with your success. One of the most important qualities you need to be successful is to be able to execute consistently on long-term plans. So immature people tend to have a lot of money problems, a lot of relationship problems, and so on. Problems at school, problems with their boss, problems with their family, but especially financial problems. Immaturity is a lack of understanding of what will lead to your own well-being. The immature person is fooling himself about what will actually serve him best, which is why immature people tend to destroy their own health. The immature person is at war with himself, in contradiction, full of contradiction. The mind has more contradictions in it. The mature mind understands that eliminating contradictions from itself is an important aspect of the health of the mind, whereas the immature mind is so full of illusions and bullshit and contradictions, and it's at conflict with itself, at odds with itself, and ultimately at war with itself, and destroys itself in the end, which is, of course, what Trump has done to himself. All of Trump's antics will lead to his ultimate self-destruction, as of course they should. And it's completely obvious to a mature person that it would work this way. Only to someone as foolish and stupid as Trump or a Trump supporter can they think that you can just get away with this, that the universe will allow you to just get away with this kind of behavior over and over and over again without any consequence. This is preposterous, absolutely laughable. The only way you can get away with this kind of behavior is just through luck. It's a matter of time. And, Trump has had a lot of luck. He's already very old and he's gotten away with a lot of stuff. So he's had a lot of luck. I would say he's been more lucky than you will be if you act as foolishly as he has in his life. So he's a very lucky guy. But I think his run is, his luck is running short, as we're seeing. I would not want to be him right now. Of course, as I said already, immaturity is the inability to let go. To let go of what? Thoughts, people, arguments, ideology, perspective, agenda. You're just so attached to it. It's a clinging kind of energy. You can't let it go. There's a thought that just keeps going through your head and you just can't let that thought go. See, that's what emotional immaturity looks like. And it's an inability to be at peace, to be calm, to be gentle. Peace is the fruit of a mature life, a life devoted to cultivating maturity. Immaturity is self-deception, fantasy, illusion, falsehood. Immaturity is materialistic living. Maturity is spiritual living. Of course, immaturity is synonymous with foolishness, unconsciousness, a lack of intelligence. And ultimately, immaturity is just selfishness. Of course. What else would it be? So, in the end, when we boil it all down, it gets very simple. You're either devoted to a life of selfishness and immaturity, or a life of selflessness and maturity. Here's a list of examples of immature behavior, just to get your mind jogging. Abandoning your child, lying, cheating, scamming, and defrauding, theft in all of its forms. Why do immature people gravitate towards theft in all of its, and there are a lot of very subtle forms of theft, which I will talk about in my episode future one called The Avoidance of Hard Work. That's coming soon. We're going to talk about theft there. Theft is a much bigger topic than people realize. There are so many different forms of theft, and all of them are perpetrated by immature people. Why is that? Because, like I said earlier, the immature people don't want to work hard. Therefore, if you're not going to work hard in life, but you still want all the goodies, which of course immature people all do, the only way you can get that is through some form of theft. A lot of these forms of theft are not called theft. And immature people actually think that that they're not thieves just because it's not called theft. But there's a lot of stuff that's not called theft that should be called theft. We'll get into that in that other episode in the future. So stay tuned for that. It's going to be a good one. Another example of immaturity is losing your temper, getting offended and upset easily, getting triggered in a debate or a flame war, trolling other people, taking glee in someone else's defeat or suffering, getting morally outraged, bragging. What color is your Bugatti? Counting how many girls you've had sex with and bragging about it. Calling women sluts and whores. Manipulating someone into giving you sex and money. Calling people pedophiles. Oh, this is a doozy. This is a favorite one today. This is so popular. Accusing people of being pedophiles is like the most immature thing. It's just the hallmark of an immature mind. Defaming and smearing people's reputations. Seeking validation for your success. Seeking social media attention. Avoiding emotional labor. Leeching off of your friends and family. Wanting to take all the credit for yourself. Manipulating friends and spouses. Exaggerating, not being truthful or accurate. Bad faith. Lack of intellectual honesty. Taking joy from inflicting suffering on others. Only behaving well when others are watching. Taking advantage of naive people. Throwing objects and slamming doors. Whining and complaining without taking action. Watch out for this one. Especially in the political realm. A lot of people do whining and complaining in the political realm, but then they take no action. Being involved in dirty political campaigns. Breaking just laws. Expecting people to buy you things or to do work for you because you don't want to do it yourself and you're just looking for somebody else to do it for you. That's the list. Let me make a few points here about society at large. If you're spending a lot of time online, on YouTube, on social media, on forums, observing politics and so forth, and even entertainment, this whole online sort of YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter ecosystem, Reddit ecosystem, if you're anywhere near this, which you probably are if you watch me, then you have a lot of examples of immaturity going around today. Social media influencers, celebrities, and so forth, these people are demonstrating some of the most immature ways of behaving, which is very unfortunate. And if you're a youngster growing up, this can really twist you up. There are a few mature role models out there for you. Our culture right now celebrates stupidity and immaturity. Look at the rise of Donald Trump, Andrew Tate, the stuff that's going on with Elon Musk. This is the celebration of immaturity. And online platforms tend to reward this kind of immature behavior. Drama, arguing, fighting, name-calling, bullshitting, gossiping, ego, narcissism, fraud, these crypto scams, right? All of this is rewarded by these online platforms and in our politics. So some of the most successful people are the people who are the most immature, which is rather perverse and twisted, don't you think? Well, what I say is that shame on all these people. I'm holding you to a higher standard. I hold myself to a higher standard. You're better than this. And I don't want you to get some low standard of what you're going to be as a human being from consuming all this online horseshit content. That's just immature nonsense. You're after maturity here. That's what we're about. That's what self-actualization is about. That's what spirituality is about. Consider as an example how this issue of maturity applies even just outside of your personal life. Consider the difference between, for example, a mature industry versus an immature industry. An immature industry might be something like social media or the internet, companies, Silicon Valley, their motto has been move fast, break things. This is the definition of immature behavior. This crypto fraud stuff we're seeing, the sort of the Wild West. It's chaotic. There's a lack of self-restraint. Interesting. Here are some areas where you might want to take a specific look for maturity versus immaturity. Politics. What does immature politics look like, and what does mature politics look like? Well, if you want more on that, I have a lot of material, I think some top-notch material. Go check out my series, 4-part series called Conscious Politics, where I explain to you what I think mature politics look like and how different it is from what we're currently seeing online. The next area is relationships, dating, and sex. What is a immature attitude towards relationships, dating, and sex, and what is a mature attitude? That's night and day right there. Family relations. What do immature versus mature family relations look like? Then in the area of business, finances, money, and investing. What's immature? What's mature? Really think about what are some examples of mature ways of doing business. That's still something that mankind really struggles with collectively because of the influence of Wall Street and all this sort of spiral dynamic stage orange stuff, which is quite toxic and immature. Then spirituality and religion. In the area of spirituality and religion, what is immature spirituality? What is mature spirituality? That's night and day, night and day. And then in the domain of morality, what is immature morality? What is mature morality? Now understand that immature people are mostly immature because they were raised by other immature people. And one of the hallmarks of maturity is to be able to deal with immature people in a graceful and skillful manner. And this is a little difficult because there's levels of maturity. And what's going to happen is that first you're very immature. Then you become a little bit more mature and you look down. Now you can recognize people like Trump as being very immature. But you're still not that mature because you're at a level where you're like in the middle where you don't know how to deal with immature people. So what you do is you just kind of vent and fume and yell at them and stuff like that, call them names. But you don't have that sort of tier 2, spiral dynamics tier 2 level of maturity and wisdom and consciousness where you're able to even sort of integrate immature people into your acceptance and embrace of all of reality. Because, immature people are a giant chunk of reality that you can't just demonize them, right? See, that would be immature. To demonize immature people would itself be an immature approach to dealing with immature people. So what's the mature way of dealing with immature people? Well, that's something that's like requires a double dose of maturity. That's like maturity squared. To be able to deal with immature people maturely and gracefully and skillfully. That's like some spiral wizardry stuff right there. That's tier 2. Personally, I struggle with that. You might say, well, Leo, but aren't you like venting and fuming at Trump and all this? Shouldn't you have a more mature way of talking about Trump? And look, it's not like I'm offended by Trump or anything. It's just that, like, to me, it's just so preposterous. The whole situation is just so preposterous. And I don't see anybody just like nailing Trump on what he needs to be nailed on. Like I watch the news all the time, people criticizing Trump, but they never criticize him properly. They criticize him on all sorts of stupid shit. They don't nail him on the core thing. So that's my pet peeve there. But definitely I have more work to do on more maturely dealing with immature people. That's real difficult. I'll tell you, I deal with some immature idiots on my forum, in the comment sections. I've dealt with them for fucking years. Frankly, it does trigger me. It's difficult sometimes. It gets to you. And in the future, I anticipate maturing more and dealing with them in a more graceful manner than I have in the past. But that's a real test. That's a real test of your maturity right there. Some spiritual gurus say that, the real test of your enlightenment is go spend a week with your family, living with your family after enlightenment. That's the real test, right? Well, the real test of your maturity is, go deal with some completely immature jackass who's trolling you online or something and deal with that. Well, that's tricky. If you can handle that, maybe you're more mature than I am. Here are some things to consider. Consider a mature conversation and a mature communication versus an immature one. What does that look like? Consider a mature relationship. What does that look like? Consider a mature attitude towards work, a mature way of doing business. Consider mature spirituality. Consider mature society. What does that look like? Consider a mature culture. Consider a mature set of life goals and direction versus its opposite. All things for you to consider on your own. Now, you might wonder, well, okay, Leo, what do I do about this? How do I become more mature if I actually want to? Well, I'm glad you asked because I've got a long list for you. So write it down. Number one, of course, take ownership of things. Ask yourself this key question: where am I not taking responsibility? Or this one, who do I blame? Or this one, in what ways do I act like a child? Those are some powerful and scary questions to ask yourself, but if you're trying to be mature, take on the challenge of asking that question. See, an immature person wouldn't want to incur the emotional labor of asking such questions because the answers would probably be too painful and require you to make some changes. Next is stop blaming, arguing, judging, fighting, and name-calling. Cut this out. Stop it. Also, stop creating drama. You're creating a lot of drama. Stop it. Stop whining and complaining. Stop pursuing raw pleasure as your modus operandi in life, if that's something you do. Lead. Lead yourself, lead others. Take on leadership roles. Leadership roles will force you to become a lot more responsible. As soon as you take on a leadership role, whether as head of a household or some department in your corporation or whatever, on leading even a small team of 5 people at work, taking that leadership role when that opportunity arises, this will force you out of yourself, out of your egotism, because other people will be dependent on you and you will feel the weight of that dependence and you won't want to let them down. And so you will have less leeway to screw around and to be immature. Because if you're in a leadership position, you act immaturely, other people will very quickly put you in your place and point that out to you. You will get kicked out, you'll get fired and so forth, and it'll just not be a fun experience. So you will quickly learn to become mature in those positions, or you will lose those positions very quickly. As Trump did, rightly so. Next is learn to manage your emotions. Emotional mastery, emotional intelligence. EQ is called. I have some old videos on that front. I have a video called How to Master Your Emotions. Go check that out. Next is have an eye towards something higher and larger in life. A life purpose. For that, see my life purpose course, which can help you to develop that. Links down below in the description. Next is do philosophy and contemplate. A lot of contemplation and self-reflection. Introspection is necessary. See my episode called Introspection. Actually, it's called Developing Introspection. See my episode how to contemplate using a journal, how to ask powerful questions. Go see all those. An intro to serious philosophy. Go see that one. Next is burning through your karma. I have a powerful episode called Burning Through Karma. Go watch that if you don't know what that phrase means. Exhaust your egoic pettiness and observe how ugly it is. Observe the ugliness of your own selfishness. Basically, that's the formula right there. Next is meet your basic survival needs. Learn to take care of yourself. Become self-reliant and independent. Stop relying on others to take care of you. It might seem like, but Leo, isn't taking care of my basic survival needs, isn't that selfish? Shouldn't I be more selfless and go helping others? But see, this is foolish. A mature way of helping others is to first help yourself, ground yourself, solidify yourself so that you're in control of your emotions, you're in control of your finances, you're not desperate, you're not clinging, You've got your basic sex needs taken care of. All that basic stuff, you take care of that. Then with the foundation you build from there, you now have the capacity to help others, to raise a family, to be a leader, and to maybe go into governance and so forth. But if you can't take care of your basic survival needs, you're not going to be able to really help others effectively. And then to compensate for that inability, you're going to come up with all sorts of fantasies, delusions, and manipulation techniques to try to hold together this house of cards. Build your life on a solid foundation is what I'm telling you. That's the mature way to go about it. Whereas immature people are always building houses of cards, and then they're always falling apart, and they have to glue them back together with bullshit. That's basically how that works. Next way to become mature is follow this principle of right action, as it's called. The principle of right action. Generally speaking, you know the right thing that needs to be done at the right time. You just don't do it because you're too irresponsible. So start doing that. Next way to become more mature is to pursue the good life, as I call it. I have many episodes that talk about that and how to pursue that. And in general, I'll say this. Strive to be good. This notion of being good is underutilized these days. People aren't talking about it. Really, you want a good life? Strive to be good. It's that simple. I think I've talked about this elsewhere. I have a video call. I have an episode called "What is Goodness?" I think something like that. Something goodness. Search for goodness. You'll find it. It's a good episode. Another way is to be honest even when it's painful and difficult. Cultivate that honesty habit. Also, discipline yourself. Work hard. Stop avoiding hard work. That's half your problem right there in life. Just avoiding hard work. Now, when I say work hard, that doesn't mean work hard and be dumb about the way you work. It's not just about the raw quantity of hours. That's not what hard work means. To me, hard work also means working smart, too. You put in a lot of hours. I'm not saying be a workaholic per se. You can do this at 40 hours a week. You don't need to work much more than 40 hours a week to work hard. But during those 40 hours, really work. And then also make sure that those 40 hours are going towards something. It's not going to some sort of, trivial thing. It's going to something important and valuable that's generating value for the world. That's what I consider serious work. Expose yourself to massive life experience. I have a whole episode on that. Go watch that. Take on ever larger challenges. Challenge yourself in life rather than waiting for life to challenge you. Be self-directed. Confront harsh truths, and in general, undertake the journey to pursue truth. Truth with a capital T. Pursue truth. What is truth? Well, I have an episode. What is truth? Go watch that. That'll get you started. I also have an episode, How to Discover What's True. That's a really good one. It's a guided inquiry. Go check that out. Next is do serious spirituality. That's part of this process of pursuing truth. Spirituality, if you're doing it properly, will disabuse you of many of your immature ways. Practice conscious relationships. That's something I'll have an episode on soon. Stay tuned for that. Have children, but here in parentheses, consciously. Have children consciously, deliberately, right? That's different than just having some sex with an accidental child when you're not ready. I mean, like, deliberately have children. And then really work towards becoming the best parent you can be. I think very practically, that's probably an avenue for most people's maturation in life. If you're not going to do the whole spiritual path, do the family path, but do it consciously. Because if you just do it, flying by the seat of your pants, it'll still probably mature you, but not as much as it could. Like, you could really turn the creation of a family into its own whole developmental path for yourself, if you wanted to, if that's something you're interested in. Of course, don't have children just for the sake of developing yourself. Actually want them. This is assuming that you want them. Next is learn to communicate clearly and to articulate your thoughts and emotions. I'll have a few episodes on clarity, and I'll have an episode on clarity coming soon. I'll have an episode on conscious communication. Stay tuned for that. The next point is study developmental psychology models. Spiral Dynamics, The 9 Stages of Ego Development by Susan Cook-Greuter, that model. I've shared both these models. You can find episodes and series that I have on all these models. I have multi-part series on all this. Just reading these models, understanding them, this will give you a huge leg up on maturing yourself. It basically shows you a roadmap. These psychological developmental models show you a roadmap of human maturity. This maturity generally takes place in stages that have been very well studied scientifically and outlined for you. So just go watch that material and you'll know what your next step is. You'll know where you are and what the next step is and what the step is above that. Practice not knowing. From that episode, the power of not knowing. Very powerful concept. Incredibly powerful concept. Most people have no idea the power of this concept. Not knowing. This not knowing leads to you to pure maturity. It's the path of not knowing to maturity. Also, I recommend you stop tolerating immature people. Call them out on their bullshit, as I have done with Donald Trump. It's one of the reasons I did it here, to demonstrate that to you. But also, if you're surrounded by immature friends and family, you got to drop them. If they're not willing to mature, drop them. Stop making promises you can't keep. Think before you speak. Especially in this online culture where people are paid just to speak and to just blabber on and on and on. This sort of like Joe Rogan type of speech where you just sit down, you don't think very much, and you just kind of like gossip and you're just kind of like spitballing shit. Let's just spitball shit in public in front of millions of people. This has become normalized as if this is healthy way of using your fucking mouth and mind. It's not. In the past, humans would think for hours, for years, for decades before they spoke. Today, some idiot turns on a microphone and earns $100 million just spitballing bullshit and conspiracy theories and shit like that and gossip online. And this gets rewarded as some sort of height and pinnacle of success. I mean, it's preposterous. Do you know how much time I think before I fucking speak to you? I exhaust myself. I had to take a nap today before speaking to you because I exhausted myself for hours thinking about what I'm going to speak to you about. Because it's so important. Because that's what a mature person would do. A mature person would not sit and speak for hours to you about some horse shit that his mind just spun up in the spur of the moment. I exhaust myself to speak to you. Because that's the only responsible way to speak. When you have a big platform and influence. What kind of influence do you have? Think before you speak. If our ancestors saw the way that people speak these days online, they would be ashamed and disgusted. The only reason we're not aware of it very much these days is because it's like we've been boiled alive like a frog in water. As the internet was coming online slowly over a few decades, we slowly boiled ourselves alive. To develop more maturity, stop acting defensively. Stop defending and justifying yourself. Reflect on all the ways you've been immature in the past. The key question to ask yourself here is, what are all the ways I've been immature in the past? you should be able to come up with a very long list. Just think about those. Here's a few other questions to contemplate. Which parts of me are mature and which parts of me are immature? Because you've got both. You're not, even if you're a very immature person, you've got some mature aspects to you, of course. And then, of course, even if you're a very mature person, you've got some immature aspects to you. Now you might say, Leo, well, aren't you guilty of immaturity yourself? Of course. Of course. I've said immature things. I've done immature things, both on camera and off camera. Of course, that's been part of my maturation process, part of my evolution and development. But overall, I've always been exceptionally mature. Ever since I was a kid. I remember in school, it was kind of like, I was probably the most mature person in my school, honestly, for my age. And I'm talking about like high school. And like, it just boggled my mind, like how these kids could be like running around, having sex, smoking weed, socializing, going to parties, doing all this stupid shit, drinking. Like, to me, it was like, what the fuck are you doing? But of course, yeah, there's still plenty of immaturity in me. I mean, I've frankly grown out of a lot of it over the last 10 years, but there's still some left, for sure. For sure. To be like perfectly mature, that's so fucking difficult. Honestly, when I think about it, like it makes me kind of like, ugh. It's like, that's not easy to do. I don't look forward to doing that. Like, that's just like, it requires so much sacrifice, so much surrendering. Like, man, it's difficult. You might say, well, Leo, but doesn't this, why'd you shoot this episode? Because it sounds like what you did here is you just gave another list for what wisdom is. Isn't maturity just wisdom? And you already have an episode called What is Wisdom, where basically you outline the difference between wisdom. You give a list of wisdom and you gave a list about what foolishness is. So isn't this the same? There's a lot of overlap, isn't there? And my answer to that is yes, of course. It's basically the same list. But look, what you have to understand, don't take this for granted. We began this episode sort of like not knowing what maturity was. It wasn't clear, it wasn't defined, and we didn't know where it would lead exactly. When you're doing one of these philosophical inquiries, you don't know where it's going to lead. You might sit there for hours doing this inquiry on maturity, then at some point after like 5 hours, you realize, oh, well, maturity is just the same thing as wisdom. Of course, and I already knew what wisdom was. Yeah, but you didn't know that maturity was equivalent to wisdom. It took you 5 hours of contemplating to get there. And now that you've equated those two things, don't take that for granted as something insignificant. When you make an equation between two important concepts like wisdom and maturity, or maturity and selflessness, for example, or maturity and consciousness, when you connect these things, it might seem like, well, you're just saying the same things over and over again. But it's like, no, you're making deeper connections in your mind. And that depth of understanding is important. See, understanding is not just a binary thing where it's like, oh, you understand it or you don't. It's like, no, how deeply do you understand it? Because the more deeply you understand it, the more it's going to transform your life. And your life can be transformed in many different degrees. So don't think that you're just wasting time by, oh, well, this episode was kind of similar in repeat of the old episode. It's like, no, I don't try to repeat content. I'm very careful about that. If I think that two episodes are really the same thing, I don't record them. I try to hit it from different angles so that you can equate things and connect things. This connection and equation, this is critical to this work and to helping you to become more mature. Because a lot of times you can understand a thing, but you only understand it from one angle, and then you can't recognize it from another angle. So to be able to recognize the same thing from multiple angles, this is not common. Not common at all. And this is part of our work here together. Now you might say, well, but Leo, I mean, man, it kind of sounds like you're making becoming mature, like this obligation, this chore that I have to do. And isn't this kind of like not a very fun way to live? What if I want to live more adventurously and spontaneously in a sort of maybe a more feminine fashion, a more chaotic fashion? Isn't like maturity for square people and, only certain kinds of people? Why become mature after all, if it's so much hard work? Well, maturity is not just for men or for women, and it's not just for one personality type or another. Maturity is something much more fundamental than that. So I suggest that no matter what kind of person you are, what kind of lifestyle you want to have, and you can have more spontaneous, more adventurous lifestyles versus not, maturity is probably something you want to seriously consider. Why? Because it's going to help you substantially with your relationships. It's going to give you more stability and peace of mind. It's going to reduce suffering significantly for you. It will lessen conflict, and you will have less instances of getting into trouble. Immature people get themselves into a lot of trouble. And a lot of times they're not as lucky as a Donald Trump. Trump is extremely lucky that he didn't get himself into more trouble than he already did. And his trouble ain't over yet. Also, more success. Sure, these days, many celebrities and very successful people, they can become successful even though they're very immature. That's possible, but generally speaking, being immature is not a good strategy for becoming successful. It can work, but in general, immature people are not successful people for the most part, because they just can't maintain the consistency that's required to achieve solid success. Or their success is very rocky. They get it and then they lose it, which is, why would you want that kind of success? You want solid success. And especially if you've been struggling, like maybe you've tried to become successful, maybe you tried to launch a business, or you tried to make some money, right? You tried to become successful and it's failing and failing and failing and failing. Well, maybe now you're getting sick of the fact that you're too immature to do that, and that what's necessary is not some sort of, business in a box, get rich quick scheme or some crypto thing. It's like, no, you need to go deeper into the foundation of your psyche and personality and look at your immaturity. How do you fix your immaturity so that you could then run a stable, successful business over years? That's probably the kind of solution you're going to need. More satisfaction. There's a kind of deep, higher quality satisfaction that comes with living a mature life that the immature person cannot even fathom or appreciate. And to live a more profound life, if you want a profound life, which is what I teach, if you're interested in that notion, then you can't get that through immaturity. The path is the path of maturity, the path of consciousness, the path of wisdom, the path of goodness, the path of introspection, contemplation, the path of selflessness. And ultimately, the reason you want to pursue maturity is consider this. This is where we wrap up. I want you to consider mature love. Consider that there's such a thing as immature love, and then there's mature love. And that this is the biggest thing that you're missing. And that this is ultimately the whole point of life and human development, is to go from immature love to mature love. And then the deepest satisfaction you get is mature love. But the question is, what is mature love? And that's something that is so profound that it goes beyond the scope of this episode, and I'm not going to elaborate upon it here. If you want, you can find other episodes. What is Love Part 1? What is Love Part 2? And plenty of others. There's another one I have called How to Practice Love. Those will get you started towards an understanding of mature love. But that's really the prize. That's why you're doing all this sacrificing. That's why you're putting in the work. That's why you become an adult, is to experience mature love. The desire to develop yourself and an interest in self-help, I would suggest, is a hallmark of maturity. Most people are not that interested in self-help. In fact, a lot of people like to shit on self-help, to be cynical about self-help, to dissuade you from doing self-help, talking about it as though some kind of scam or something. These are people who are not interested in developing themselves. This is not the kind of people you want to surround yourself with. So if you're the kind of person who's interested in self-help, that alone is enough. I can work with that. I can work on you. I can help you if you're that kind of person, right? Because that's the diamond in the rough. See, we can take that diamond, we can polish it up. That's what I teach, is self-help. So recognize that diamond in the rough within you, and now just spend the next decade or two polishing it up by pursuing your passion, following up on your passion of self-help, reading the books, watching the content, going to workshops, so forth. Do that. If you've got that itch, that passion for self-help the way that I did when I first discovered it, maybe 15 years ago or so, do that. That's crucial. And also an interest in spirituality, serious spirituality. That's also a hallmark of maturity. That's also a little seed, a little kernel, a little diamond in the rough that needs to be polished up over decades. That's key. Don't overlook that. Prize that in yourself. You have something in you. You have that diamond in the rough within you. You are a diamond in the rough, and we're going to polish you up through this work. In conclusion, immature people are devils, and mature people are gods. And of course, as God, you gain access to infinite love. And of course, that's all there is, and that's all that life is about.